What's going on, guys? Welcome into episode number 25 of the Ask Tony Show. Thank you so much for being here. We're back filming in the office, so I'm super excited about that. I'm excited about today's questions, so let's get into it.
What do you think about Homie?
I actually don't have a problem with Homie at all, but most agents do. And actually, about 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote an article about Homie. And it's, out of all my articles, it's like the only one anybody ever cared about. It has over 100,000 hits, and I still get messages about that one article that I wrote 4 years ago, and it was about Homie. And so basically what I talked about, and I'll probably link it up somewhere or share it, but I don't have a problem with Homie at all. I think that when you're in a business marketplace, it's a competition. So there are many different business models. But for those of you that don't know what Homie is, it's basically a company that has done a ton of marketing here in the state of Utah, and they charge very little for their service. They list homes for very little. They have like rebates and stuff like that. So they do a lot at a very low cost. And so a lot of agents don't like that because there are a lot of agents that kind of cling to that mentality of the 3% that they're supposed to be charged, that's what they're worth, blah, blah, blah. And so in my opinion, when there's a big player like Homie that comes into your marketplace and is willing to do the thing that you do for less, you have really 3 options. You have two options, but usually some people take one extra one that I will mention. But number one, you can improve your service. So in Homie's case, they're cheap, but their service is very basic. So they don't have a lot of other features or perks. It's very, very basic, obviously because they have to keep their costs low. So option one, you can make your product better. You can improve your value proposition to the customer. Now, if you do that, number one, it's gonna be expensive because if you have more features, you have more stuff, a higher value prop has a higher cost, therefore your profit is going to go down. That's number one. And number two, in order to communicate to the marketplace that now your product is better, now your CAC ratio, we'll put it down here, is also going to increase because you have to have increased marketing, increased advertising to get the word out that now your service is better. You have a new feature, you have this, you have that. So you have to be more aggressive when it comes to your advertising. So that's why a lot of people say companies like this are disruptors, because they are disruptors. Now everybody else has to try to compete or has to try to play. So option one, you can make your product better. It's expensive, you might take a hit on your numbers, but the hope is that on the back end, once the marketplace understands that your product is really that much better, then you won't have to have such a high customer acquisition cost and your numbers can go back to normal. That's number one. Number two, you can play ball. You can drop your price to compete. This is what happens in retail. So in retail, if somebody else sells a t-shirt for less, everyone else sells it for less to compete. You can do that, but most agents don't want to do that because they want to charge as much as they possibly can. So that's option two. You can simply drop your price to compete. And the other option, which a lot of agents opt to do, is you can try to ignore them and get mad at them. So there's a ton of agents in the marketplace that are just in the corner, just angry at the world, pouting that Homie charges so much less, and they're trying to sue them and do all these crazy things because they don't want to compete. They want the status quo to stay at what it's at, which is agents charge 3%, and that's just what they charge. In my case, I do both. So we're trying really hard to increase our value prop, which again is expensive, and at the same time, I'm willing to negotiate a commission. I'm willing to play ball. That's why I'm winning. That's why our team is winning, because we're willing to do both things. We have a better product through distinct features that other brokerages simply do not have. And at the same time, I'm willing to negotiate with you. So if you can do both, you'll do both and you'll actually win. But what you shouldn't do is just be upset and cry that somebody else in your marketplace is willing to do what you do for less.
I'm 24 years old and I want to buy my first property. What should I do?
Young people should absolutely set the goal of buying their first property. Whether it's a condo, a townhome, whatever they can afford, but they should set a goal to purchase their first property. So I get questions like this a lot because I'm on Instagram. Young people are on Instagram and on social and stuff, and so they see my videos and they say, hey, I want to do this. For a lot of people believe that buying homes is like an old man's game, like you have to be old to buy property. That's what I thought when I first started out. I thought, you had to be in your 50s to buy your first home or whatever. But it's absolutely not the case. I've had a lot of clients come into the office who are young, in their 20s. They buy a little house and then they upgrade, they buy another house and they buy another house. There's a kid out in Ogden, his name is Edward, and he came to our office about 6 years ago. He bought a little townhome and he just kind of went through the process. He let it appreciate a couple years, then he refinanced, bought another house. Right now, at this moment, he has 6 properties and he's not even 30 years old. So it's a great setup, it's a great wealth builder, it's a great thing. So if you're young and you want to do this, the first thing you have to do is check your credit. A lot of young people have good credit because they haven't had time to mess it up. So if you have good credit, then you want to maintain that and you want to really watch it closely. Use things like Credit Karma. There's a bunch of credit checking apps out there. Monitor your credit and make sure that it's as best as it possibly can be. You want to keep it above 650, 660. So if it's below that, you want to find someone that can help you work on it, but your credit is the number one factor. Number 2, you have to have money. So you want to start saving cash. And if you can borrow a down payment from your parents or whatever the case may be, awesome. But you need to have money. Do not use a down payment assistance program. I'm telling you, I say this all the time. It's a complete scam. The banks make so much money on down payment assistance program because of the interest rate that they're going to charge you. So I'm one of the few people in the marketplace that are going to tell you this. But if you can avoid using a down payment assistance program, avoid using it at all costs. I'd rather you not buy now, save up your money for 6 months or 8 months to get a down payment and buy later. So that is preferable. If you use the down payment assistance program, you're getting scammed. I don't care what anybody says. It's not a smart financial choice. So you need to have money. That's number 2. And number 3 is your employment history. So hopefully you've been working in the same place full-time for the last 2 years. If it's not in the same place, the bank wants to see that there aren't any gaps in employment. But they want to see stability, especially because you're young. So you want to, if you don't have 2 years full-time in the same place, you want to get that. If you're self-employed, you want to file your taxes for the last 2 years. Make sure that those are in place and that you actually report what you make. There aren't any funny business going on with your taxes. But that's really the 3 things that you're going to need. Monitor your credit, you're going to need some money, and make sure that your employment history is in check.
I'm building a home that will be ready early next year and need to sell mine. When should I list?
All right, guys, so this is actually a question that I got last week, and it was a phone conversation, and it was quite a lengthy phone conversation. So I'm going to try to kind of compartmentalize what I conveyed to the person that asked the question here in video form. So the scenario is this person is building a new property that is going to be done December, January, early next year. And so they have to sell their home. So they had a couple questions. Now there's going to be some real estate lingo in here, so if you don't know what it is, shoot me a DM, I'll let you know. But basically, they had a couple of options. They need to sell their home in order to buy the house that they're building. So the question was, should I list it now and then get a lease back until my property is finished, the one that I'm building? Or should I wait to list? Should I have a contingency? What should I do? So what I conveyed to the person that asked the question is, number 1, when you talk about leasebacks, a leaseback is an agreement that you enter into with the buyer of your home that essentially says, we're going to close, and then I will rent the home back from you for X amount of time at X amount of rent, whatever the case may be. So his first idea was to list it now because the market's hot, sell it maybe in 30 days, sell it in August, and then get a lease back for 4 or 5 months or however much longer he needs until his home is finished. The problem with that is that most lenders are not going to allow a lease back that's that long. The longest lease back I've ever had is 60 days. So especially if the buyer is an FHA buyer, the lender, the underwriter, they're not going to want to see a lease back for 6 months. It's not going to work. They're not going to approve you for it. So if you want to do that, I guess you could do it outside of closing, but now you're in a double contract and that's technically illegal. So that's not a good idea. So the other option is to list it later. And so when it comes to listing it later, that was my recommendation. Typically, when you're in a sale to buy scenario, I recommend listing about 90 days out. The reason why is because 90 days, you're still within that 60-day threshold, because usually a closing takes about 30. So if you list today and you get a buyer today, you're probably going to close in about 30 days. So if you follow the timeline, you close in 30 days, you're about 60 days out from your completion date. Make sense if you're following the numbers here? So you have 60 days left. So you can do a leaseback for 60 days, you just can't do it for 6 months. And if you do it 90 days out, and let's say halfway through the transaction, your buyer cancels, you still have time to go out and find another buyer, if you will. So that way, you don't get in trouble with the lender with a leaseback that's way too long. And it gives you time in case something happens with your buyer, you're not in a bind. Because if you list 30 days out, now if that buyer doesn't perform, now you're in trouble. And now your purchase could potentially be in jeopardy. So what I would do is not list now. Don't worry about the leaseback because you're going to get in trouble. Or you're going to get your buyer in trouble. List 90 days out, and if you close 60 days out, 45 days out, just do a leaseback.
Thoughts on renting co-working space?
Co-working space is fine. It really is what works for you. The thing about co-working space, it's a lot cheaper, so it's not like an actual office that you have to pay a ton of money for. So they're usually much cheaper. You can go a place like WeWork or Regis, or whatever the case may be. You go in, there's like an open area, and you can just sit down. They have Wi-Fi and stuff. So if that works for you, perfect. As I said, it's a much cheaper alternative if you're just starting out than getting a full-on office. I'm not a huge fan simply because I try to use the space to film videos. So if I'm in an open space where there's a lot of people, then I'm probably not going to be able to do that. So I rent space to film videos, or I do it in my office, or I try to do it in a private space because you're filming. So you don't want to film in a public space because it's a little bit awkward and people might not appreciate that. But if you just need it to do some work, if you need it to just have a quiet place to work, if maybe it doesn't work at home, you don't want to full-on rent a full office, co-working space is an awesome option.
What's the best way to buy my second property?
Buying your second property should be your number one goal after you buy your first property. So the way that most people do it is, and I've talked about this before, but when you go buy a second property, the bank is going to ask you, what are you going to do with the first one? So you have two options. Number one, you can leave the first one as an investment property. You can rent it out. Or you can stay in the first one and buy like a condo or something and rent that out, and rent out your second property. So your second property would be the investment. If you do it that way, you have to put at least 20% down if the second property is your investment. If you're gonna leave the first home as your investment and you're gonna move into the second house, then you just have to justify that it's gonna be rented. You have to have the most likely is that you're gonna have to go conventional on this side. But really the main requirement is just to justify that this first home is going to be rented. So the best way to do it, what I've seen most people do, is they take their first home, they let it appreciate, and then they either refinance it or they get a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, and they take the money that they're going to need for their down payment and they put it over here. That's what most people are doing, especially now, because people that bought 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, their interest rate was higher. So if you had a higher interest rate before, now your home is appreciated. In many cases, you can refinance to today's rates, take the money out, drop your rate, and your payment is even lower than it was before, even though you took out $40,000. It's crazy. But we're seeing this a lot with the people that are refinancing with our preferred lender. So that's usually the best way to do it. If you don't want to refinance your house, then you're going to need 20%. So you're going to have to come up with that money somewhere. But the idea is for your second property to be an investment, to be a good investment, you need 20% down. So the best way, in my opinion, if you don't have the money, is to refinance or rent out this home and go buy another one.